G'day everyone, I'm Fiona and I'm here at Fire by Alive 2024 and I'm coming to you from Australia. I'm going to talk to you today about how risk engineers from insurance companies, and not just Zurich, assess property risks from a slightly different angle. I will also give you some situations where you might like to notify your insurer, and I've also got a couple of case studies from where people have and haven't notified their insurer. This is important for anybody working in the fire industry or who design buildings, build buildings that will eventually need insurance. But first, I'm going to tell you a little story. A few years ago, when I was the chair of the IFE's Women in Fire Engineering group, I was asked to participate in a STEM event for young girls at a prestigious event at a private school in London. Now, this wasn't a school for daughters of celebrities. This was the school that top CEOs and startup companies sent their children to. It was super high achieving, and these girls were destined for great things. I gave an insightful presentation about what it was like to be a fire engineer. And I gave them loads of examples of what industries you could work in, from the very initial design stages of a building through its whole lifespan to heritage buildings that are hundreds of years old, and even through to special effects in movies. As part of the program, we devised a competition for all of the students to draw what they thought a female fire engineer looked like. Every single one of them drew a firefighter. Now, they were all still very cute, and I happily awarded the winners a prize, but still, if these kids don't know what a fire engineer does, even after I just told them, what hope does the rest of the population have? I often find myself describing what a fire engineer does to people who ask. So, what do you think they would have drawn if I asked them to draw a risk engineer? Well, I asked Copilot, an AI program, to come up with a drawing of what it thought a risk engineer looked like. This is it. I'm not sure if that's any better. I also asked Copilot to draw a picture of a female fire engineer, and all the responses I got was of a female in a firefighting outfit with a clipboard. So, what does a risk engineer do then? As I said before, I'm Fiona. I have an honours degree in fire engineering, over 20 years experience assessing properties, and I now work as a risk engineer for Zurich Resilience Solutions. This presentation will shed some light on what a risk engineer does and what value we can add to your business. Unlike traditional fire engineers that design and assess buildings based on whether it complies with the relevant building codes, regulations or standards. Now here's the Australian National Construction Code, and I think I've got, some British standards as well, just as a few examples. All of these are based on life safety, which to a large extent, property insurers just aren't interested in. I mean, maybe if we cover the liability as well, but that's a separate session. Designing for life safety is all about making sure if there was a fire, that all of the occupants in the building could escape before the conditions within the building becomes untenable. Designing for property protection goes above and beyond this. To be able to say that if there was a fire, then it won't spread and it won't affect the whole building. So in effect, if you design for property protection, then actually you're automatically going to ensure that life safety too, as it goes above and beyond what basic life safety measures require. Now, don't get me wrong, whilst there is an absolute need for all of these standards, risk engineers just don't often refer to them. So, what does a risk engineer consider, I hear you ask? Look, we look at a variety of different things, including what building materials are used. Generally speaking, insurers don't like anything combustible on the outside of a building, and for good reason too. So ACM panels are a good example, as they can add to the spread of fire on the external facade of the building. So we look at where they're placed and how they can aid that vertical fire spread. We also look at solar panels. You can get some fancy ones now integrated into the glass windows of buildings. Green walls, and maybe not so green walls if they're not watered enough. And even buildings that have a lot of timber, especially on their facades or internally, that's not protected. This is actually a site I visited a little while ago. This is actually a combustible ceiling lining. It's in their goods in area, so where trucks pull in, so a high fire risk. Now, whilst the area is sprinkled, those sprinkler heads are below the ceiling, and this product would quite quickly spread a fire if it was to occur. Now, although not a major risk, it's just an example of where if this customer had engaged with us at an earlier stage, we could have helped them easily choose an alternative before it was fitted. I used to work as the fire safety specialist for the BBC a number of years ago, and I would often get asked by programs about whether they could incorporate often combustible items into their studios. So one such example was a children's program that wanted to put AstroTurf on the walls and the ceilings of a studio. Now, AstroTurf is plastic, it's highly combustible, and it releases thick black smoke when it burns. So not a good idea for a room full of children, and actually quite a lot of hot ignition sources and lights. Most commercial property insurance contracts have written into them the need to notify the insurer if they have any impairments to the fire protection systems. This includes any areas isolated for construction work or even faulty heads. Failure to report impairments could lead to a policy violation and potential coverage denials. And there actually has been a number of high-profile cases recently where insurers have failed to pay up following an investigation that showed that sprinklers had been deactivated. Sprinklers have proven to be highly effective. They've been shown to be successful at controlling a fire about 96% of the time, demonstrating their critical role in fire containment, where flame damage is confined to the room of origin, so where it started, in 95% of fires. Buildings equipped with sprinklers experience a significantly lower average loss. This ranges between 34 to 68% less compared to buildings without sprinklers. This highlights the financial benefits of investing in a comprehensive fire protection system. Most insurers will have this process to notify about impairments, and it's a critical aspect of risk management, and it allows us to work collaboratively with you to evaluate the potential risks associated with these impairments. Our team of risk engineers will then establish suitable short-term controls to mitigate these risks and ensure the continuity of your business operations. Just remember, transparency with your insurer helps maintain a healthy relationship and ensures you're adequately protected in case of emergencies. I remember dealing with impairments myself when I worked at the beautiful heritage building that is the Royal Academy of Arts on Piccadilly in London. I was their health, safety, and fire manager there. I was dealing with very old fire systems and constantly reporting impairments. If it wasn't our Vesda system, it was our smoke, heat, or often our beam detectors. Often during installation of new artwork, the vibrations would often just kick the beam detectors slightly out of alignment. And then it was often a tossing up between fixing that, getting MUPs in to fix the beams around this expensive artwork, or putting in place other control measures. We would also liaise with our insurers to decide on these control measures during extensive renovation works, when areas of the building were vacant, and when we changed the use of certain areas. Unfortunately, the Royal Academy knew firsthand how devastating a fire can be to a historic building and how costly the rebuild can be. And this example here was just one gallery space back in the 90s. When I was preparing this presentation, I asked some of my colleagues what they thought was the biggest or most common issue they saw that they wish customers would come to us about. And hands down, the winner, all of my colleagues, was when customers had changes in occupancy. So here's another example of a site I visited not too long ago. They have a large amount of timber stored inside their warehouse on racking just like this, with full ESFR sprinkler protection. But when the company outgrew this storage, so they needed more storage, they built some racking out in their loading bay area, such as this. Except the sprinklers here were only designed for an ordinary hazard group, and the storage was just simply too high for this design type. And there was a potential for these sprinklers to not be fully effective if there was a fire. Now it's hard to see from this picture, but there's a really big open door and a real potential for this fire, if it did start out here, to pass through into the building and of course affect the roof. Now, of course, this customer had no idea that this was even an issue. But this is where we can help as your insurer if folks only reached out to us when they made changes to their buildings. I used to get quite a lot of requests at the BBC for changes in occupancy, but this is more related to the number of people within a venue. They always wanted to try and stick as many people as possible into a space that just wasn't designed for it. You must consider things like the total floor area and what activities they are undertaking, as well as the number of exits and the total exit widths. I used to get quite a lot of experience of requests such as this. So whether it was a space they turned into a studio or a studio with a traditional audience and maybe wanting to stick more people into it. So risk engineers also get involved in other new and emerging technologies, such as EV vehicles and lithium-ion batteries. Now, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of the risks of lithium-ion batteries, as that's a whole other CPD session. And no doubt Rebecca's got some of those lined up. But what I will say is this, that whilst the regulatory framework and the various building regs and codes in many countries are still playing catch up. Almost all insurers now have their own design guidelines for things such as the location of EV charging points, which includes what additional protection measures they may need to be considered, compartmentation, distance to other buildings, separation from other vehicles, detection, sprinklers, ventilation, the list goes on. And of course, this is all compounded when you think about locations such as underground or undercover car parks. So I'm going to talk you through now just a couple of brief case studies. This first case study is about a small, not small, actually, it's quite large, but it was a small goods company that had been at this particular location since 1970. The structures itself were primarily made of brick walls with metal roofs, but a lot of internal EPS lining. Had EPS suspended ceilings in a lot of areas too. They had smoke detection in all areas. They had fire hose reels, extinguishers, external hydrants, and there was a full-time fire brigade located nearby with a 5 to 10 minute response time. Zurich risk engineers were actually involved with the site, visiting in March 2006 and early 2007. The site was rated a fair both times, which isn't particularly good, and we did recommend a number of risk improvement actions. Notably, high priority was given to the installation of a water deluge system between the buildings and in the tunnels, and of course sprinkler protection. Later in 2007, this site suffered a fire loss in the region of $118 million, Australian dollars, that is. This was a significant blow to the company, with 12 million being lost business interruption in the first year alone. The loss, of course, was distributed among several insurers. This case study underscores the importance of robust fire protection measures and the significant financial implications of a fire event. It also highlights the crucial role of risk engineering in identifying potential risk factors and recommending appropriate control measures. So this is an aerial view of the site taken before the fire. And the fire was traced back to its source, which was a vacuum pump located in the pre-pack area of the factory. The pump room, made of EPS, of course, was about 4 meters by 1.5 with a 4-meter high ceiling, had an interlocked exhaust fan through the roof and into the ceiling void. In the days leading up to the fire, some maintenance work had been carried out, and a contract electrician had installed a new vacuum pump timer and repaired the exhaust fan. However, on Monday, October the 8th, at about 5:30 in the morning, a flame was observed from the exhaust side of the pump. Despite the flame being extinguished with a CO2 extinguisher and subsequent changes being made to the pump, the fire continued. The maintenance manager received a call at 9:50 a.m. about a problem with the pump, and at the same time the local fire alarm was activated. Upon reaching the pump room, flames were seen coming from the northern section. Despite the use of a hose reel and extinguishers, the fire extended up into the ceiling, and likely due to that exhaust fan. The building had to be evacuated and no lives were lost. Power, gas, and the main ammonia refrigeration valve was shut off in the plant room, and the fire brigade arrived. They ended up sending 48 separate appliances by the end of the event. The fire spread from the EPS vacuum room into the roof void and then through the east section of the factory. It extended through the 2 connecting conveyor tunnels into the higher warehouse and the Palmer humidifier rooms. You can see how it's spreading. Reaches the fire-resistant brick wall, it's slowed down, but the fire spreads north and breaks through that firewall. Consumes a second building and continues to spread through the EPS panels. Despite efforts to contain the fire, damage was extensive, affecting approximately 80% of the factory and resulting in total destruction of the warehouse and the Palmer building. In 2008, all buildings had to be demolished. This is a really interesting business continuity case, as one of their other sites absorbed an increase in 200 extra tons of production a week. That's a lot of small goods. They were literally working 24/7 around the clock. But this actually resulted in increased staff fatigue, increased workers' compensation claims, work injury or liability, employer's liability, you call it in the UK, increase in sick days, and staff just generally not wanting to work this continual overtime they were being asked to. Of course, risk engineering was invited to assess all of their other sites, and they installed sprinklers at all of their other cold, storage, and abattoir sites within 24 months following this fire. On to the second case study. This is Hobart Hospital. For anybody that doesn't know, Hobart is the capital of the state of Tasmania in Australia, which is located down here in the red circle. Hobart Hospital has been a customer of ours for a while, and a colleague, a risk engineer, visited the site a number of years ago now. He assessed one of their wings to be at risk of flooding. As part of all of our property assessments, we do an assessment on natural perils to look for the chances of one thing in particular is floods. So this particular wing, especially the basement area, which had a lot of critical plant and equipment down in it, was at significant risk. So thankfully, unlike the previous small goods company, the hospital took on board all of our recommendations, and they actually spent a substantial amount of money to prevent the risk of water egress into this area. A short time after this, in early 2020, this happened. It was a 1 in 100 year flood, probably similar to what hit Dubai recently. And it took out a large section of Hobart, with a substantial amount of the city that was affected, including the area around the hospital. Thankfully, the mitigation measures worked and the hospital wasn't flooded. Now, not only did they save close to $10 million, or rather, they saved Zurich a $10 million claim, the wing in question went on to be a critical COVID ward later that year. Most people don't think much about their insurance. It's only when the worst of the worst happens do they expect help from their insurer. But what we need to encourage designers and building owners to build a relationship with their insurer and engage with them at every early opportunity. So I urge you all to speak to your insurer before you need to make that next claim. This QR code is for my LinkedIn, so please feel free to reach out and connect. Thank you.
Welcome everybody to our Q&A with Fiona Perrin, Senior Risk Engineer for Zurich Resilience Solutions. Fiona, thank you so much for joining me today. And what an incredible and interesting presentation on how to, properly showcase the misconceptions of fire and risk engineers, and the difficult challenges that are presented in this field as well, from the business owner's perspective and from the insurer's perspective. Despite this subject matter kind of being in terms of the AI that you showed at the beginning, despite the subject matter being, slightly incorrect in terms of what it portrayed, it was a pretty good drawing actually of a person, much better than a lot of AIs I've seen. So thank you for that. It's a very engaging way to describe it.
I just thought, I never sit in front of my computer screens with all those graphs sitting up, and yeah, and of course, what irritated me the most was that they made it a male. But we won't go down that path just yet.
Well, I suppose actually just hovering on that subject, given the kind of evidence that you demonstrated in that kind of area, how can we actually educate, young children, schools, young people, or university students, into understanding that actually opportunities are available in this sector. It is a sector in itself, that people don't often think of at the moment, and to make, fire more appealing and understood as an industry to be part of.
Yeah, I think there's a few ways we can go about it. And don't get me wrong, I don't have the golden answer. Um, but most kind of your traditional school leavers don't even know fire engineering, or even, degrees in fire safety exist. So raising awareness, so participating. They were actually primary school girls that I was speaking to at that event. But I've also been to women in STEM events for more senior school girls, and also sort of university level as well. So just getting out there and speaking to young people as much as possible, making sure there are role models. I really believe that, and I speak a lot about women in the industry and supporting women in the industry, but we need role models, especially for women to get into the industry. And look, you could be talking fire engineering, you could be talking risk engineering, or you could just be talking construction. We need more women in these senior roles for younger girls to be able to look up to and aspire to. But we also need to be mindful. Now, I spent 12 years at the BBC, and I know how horrible the media can be in portraying an industry, but we need to think about maybe some good news stories around fire safety. Everything that's going on in the UK at the moment, I'm kind of glad I don't live there anymore. We want to think about good stuff. And, that's why I included the Hobart Hospital example, because, that's a really great way of having good news stories that have a positive spin on things.
Definitely. I mean, a lot of wise words there. I think, firstly, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm pretty certain when I was in school, I never once even considered fire as an industry. I didn't know, except for firefighting, I had no idea that it was even a thing. And we went to loads of, abundance of careers fairs and different companies
Mm.
coming in to talk, but no one from fire. Um,
You're so right. I loved science at school. I excelled at maths. But do you think engineering or any sciences were even offered to me? I went down the allied health route. I trained as an occupational therapist initially, and it wasn't until I was 40 that I graduated from my engineering degree. So yeah, you have to know it exists in the first place.
Definitely. And I think, more and more people, I hear that from more and more people that they kind of fell in the industry, or kind of crossovered from, whether it's construction and property, or, different areas, and kind of found that they're like, oh, it's an industry that actually suits me quite well. And although that's absolutely fantastic and we love that, and obviously we want to bring those transitional skills into it, we also need to, to address that skill gap and that recruitment gap, and actually start
Mm.
inviting people to be part of the industry earlier. So definitely, I'm in
Yep.
complete agreement with everything you said. And in terms of, obviously the media as well, it's so easy to portray when something bad happens, devastating fire happens, and it needed 50 firefighters and 9 different engines and trucks available, but actually it could have been preventable by something else. You know, why not talk about this happened, but there was no loss, there was no damage to assets, people, places because they
Hmm.
had
Hmm.
this installed. Or, you know, we do need some
Yep.
of the
Yep.
nicer aspects as well.
Yeah.
And just to transition slightly onto your presentation itself, you know, at one point you spoke about the benefits of sprinkler systems and their effectiveness, and how obviously risk engineers can help organisations, you know, choose the best systems for their protection. And just in terms of kind of this new types of technology and systems coming, not so much new, but slightly different side of things. I was wondering whether or not you encounter water mist systems in your line of work so far.
Yeah, water mist, I'm actually a big fan of. I mean, I love sprinklers anyway. It's one of the biggest things I've noticed since coming to Australia is there's more sprinklered buildings. Um, but water mist is great because you don't need as much water. So your tanks are smaller, your pipes are smaller. Um, Pipes can be more expensive because they're often stainless steel, so they don't rust, which end up being more expensive, but you need smaller gauge, so less. Yeah, kind of does work out a bit more expensive, um, but they have a longer life because of that. So when I first started looking at mist systems, I was at the Royal Academy of Arts, and there's a lot of research now to suggest that water mist systems don't just work by cooling the fire, which they do. They also cool the whole atmosphere, and the fine mist pulls the soot out of the air and drops it to the floor with the water droplets. So in terms of art, protection of art hanging on the walls, you end up with less of that sort of traditional smoke damage as well. Um, they're really good at areas where potentially water could be an issue. Because most of the water system in mists do kind of evaporate and disappear, so you can use them in, electrical installations and, really high value areas where sprinklers have been an issue in the past. So, yeah, big fan of them. There is a little bit of an issue around the standards. And kind of getting those over the line, but generally a big fan of them.
No, definitely. I mean, I am too. Obviously, you've got better experience in it, better. I think from my perspective as well, I think everyone in the industry seems to know that they work and they're an option, but they're
Mm.
hesitant because, like you said, the standards around it, having, you know, it's a lot of younger technology despite being around for a long time. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, how that actually kind of comes to fruition over the next few years or so. Um,
And I think there's especially in the UK, I think there's just a general reluctance to get on board with any sort of sprinklers or mist system, and people are very quick to perhaps offer alternatives or another solution that perhaps isn't quite as good, in my view.
Yeah, no, agreed. And just moving quickly on to another kind of section of your presentation that was kind of one of the biggest things that you spoke about, and that was obviously the changes in occupancy. And
Mm,
obviously, are there any kind of
mm.
types of, you know, regulations or standards or guidance that business owners should be kind of mindful of in this area to help increase that awareness, just to try and mitigate the reliance on insurance
Yeah.
providers? Easier said
It's
than done.
so the changes in occupancy I was talking about was really relating to those sprinkler um, uh, uh, buildings with sprinklers installed. Now, at Zurich in Australia, we go by the NFPA, so the American guidance, but it's very similar to the British sprinkler guidance. So it's the NFPA 13 is the document that talks about those occupancy hazard classifications. Now, it's not easy to understand. It's not easily digestible. If you're a, building owner or facilities manager, you're right. It's really difficult, even to get your hands on a copy because they're totally expensive, and that's another story. But to understand that. But go back to the company that installed your sprinkler. So sprinkler installers are really knowledgeable, and any building with sprinklers installed should have a sprinkler block plan, and that should have on it areas. They're often kind of shaded in different colors, and then it should have a key, and it should say what each area is designed for. So whether it's an ordinary hazard class or a high hazard area, for example. And this is, I suppose, more of an issue in what I would call typically kind of highly engineered fire engineered buildings. Um, I know we had some of them in the BBC, and some areas, like at the bottom of the atrium, had to be kept clear, and then we couldn't put any furniture there. And then some areas in studios, we had to be careful of, where the heads were located, and so there's lots and lots of issues. But yeah, my advice is look at your sprinkler block plan, read your fire strategy of your building, and go back to any of the installers and stuff for more information, or go to your insurers. Quite often, we risk engineering, if it's small questions, we're a free resource. So sometimes there's a paid option, but quite often with little questions like that, we're more than happy to help.
Definitely. Well, as long as you're not calling you out to a site that is a 4 hour flight away to completely fully assess a whole building and then go, what do you think it's paid for?
Yeah, yeah.
There's some,
We do have different pay points for that. Yeah,
exactly.
down a mine in far Western Australia or something.
Oh
Yeah.
wow. Yeah, well, some great advice there. And just lastly, to finish off, given your extensive experience, what is, other than kind of, the occupancy challenges that we've just spoken about, what is the biggest challenge that you're finding, or challenges that you're finding as a risk engineer today?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of them. So one of them is that sort of lack of awareness, lack of, I suppose it's a bit of a competency issue, but do we expect building owners and facilities managers or office managers to be competent in fire? I don't know, but it's a bit of a dark art, really. And actually, probably even more so here in Australia. I find there's a lot less sort of fire safety professionals. Um, so it's competency, but then when they do get the advice, so from us, it's especially in the current climate, it's being able to afford any sort of remediation. And we could talk about the cladding crisis in the UK, but even just we work with a lot of sort of mid-market SME clients, and if we've highlighted that their whole building is potentially at risk of a total loss scenario, and we say, well, we think you should install some sprinklers. That's going to cost them $1 million. How are they going to be able to afford that in the current climate? So it is something that we take into consideration as well. But it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah, definitely. I think everyone is not just suffering from a cost of living crisis, but just in general, our economies post pandemic is still trying to build itself back up.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of strain, like you said, on SMEs. So yeah, if you can provide that advice and they know what to do and they can work towards that goal, then fantastic. But unfortunately, I'm sad to say it, but that's all we have time for.
Oh,
But
well, it's
Fiona,
been a pleasure,
yeah,
Rebecca,
it was
as
so lovely to
always.
catch up again. Thank you. And if anybody wants to ask Fiona any questions or find out any more, please obviously connect with LinkedIn, or you can connect with her speaker profile on the platform as well. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you.